feel like Talladega Nights. Like I don't know what to do with my hands.
It's like, what is Liam doing?
Just like this.
This is what I was doing with the Russell Brand thing.
Yes.
You go like this
You
the whole
capture
time.
their attention.
Hello, you 6 million awakening wonders.
They're all in each other's shots. Cut it out.
Jazz hands. 1, 2, 3, jazz hands.
Is our focus good after that? After that
fucked it all
performance?
up.
I don't know. You get what you deserve.
Whole show's out of focus. Hey everybody, welcome back to Human Reaction, your weekly source for independent commentary on news, politics, and culture, where it's always our mission to arm you with the tools that you need to cut through media misdirection and resist the mono-narrative. We got a very special show today. David, what are we talking about?
It is a special show. It's the Thanksgiving special where we're going to be recording at night, drinking substances
Grog.
and vibing and having a great time with our guest. We have some interesting stories too. El Loco wins Argentina, as well as developments with OpenAI and X and what Elon Musk is doing to Media Matters.
And while you're here, please like, comment, subscribe to wherever you are, whether it be YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, whatever. And we also cover a lot of topics, so use the chapter marks down below and jump to whatever subject you're interested in the most. And also join our Discord, where we have a community that's starting to form in there.
And for those of you that didn't know how to join the Discord, the first round of carrier pigeons did go out, so you should be receiving those any day, assuming the weather doesn't get too cold.
Should give a nice tutorial on how to create a Discord and enter a channel, you know.
Or
Someday.
Falcons. It's the weather or Falcons. There's a lot of things that get a pigeon.
We could
dangerous
upgrade
world
to
out there.
Falcons if we get some good sponsorships for this coming year. We could probably afford to upgrade to Carrier Falcons.
Carrier Falcons.
Yeah. We've got a very special guest joining us in the studio today. Liam McCollum, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's been a long time coming, and the studio is awesome. I'm very proud of you guys. I honestly think this is my favorite podcast to listen to right now. I believe you guys deserve hundreds more followers than you have, and I believe you guys are going to soar here soon.
Man, I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Why don't we start off by getting to know you a little bit? I mean, we all know you fairly well, but for our listeners who may not, other than the biggest celebrity that we've ever had on the show to date, who are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm Liam McCollum. I host my own podcast, Liam McCollum Show. Started it my sophomore year of college, about 3-4 years ago. Actually, out of the journalism department there, I was minoring in journalism, and I started to interview guests on the Washington Post, or from the Washington Post and the New York Times, and then started out more objective because I was hiding my personal beliefs, and then I was like, I'll just shoot for it and start interviewing people like Scott Horton. And I realized when I could tag people like Scott on Twitter, his followers then started seeing my clips and kind of took advantage of that, and then got affiliated with the Mises Caucus and the Montana Libertarian Party here. I help with social media through the Montana Libertarian Party. I'm also a region organizer, so very focused on local politics and still continuing my podcast while going to school.
That's awesome. How did you just connect with people from the Washington Post? You just reach out to them?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was able to use the fact that I was a student at the University of Montana. The journalism department was ranked, and I think a lot of them just wanted to talk to younger people. But then, of course, as I started to interview people like Scott Horton and more libertarian voices, I started to get rejected by those guys. But then I just decided I should lean into it. I was getting some pretty big guests, like most recently I had Peter St. Onge, who blew up on Twitter. He's become pretty big economist on Twitter. And I actually interviewed him right before he blew up. So I just was taking advantage of that and trying to connect with people on Twitter.
How many hours have you spent growing your Twitter following? Be honest.
That is a very good question. I am addicted to Twitter. I try to manage that, and I think I have some skills that I've learned, especially during law school. It's been something that I need to have better control over. But I don't know. My girlfriend constantly looks at my time on my phone and compares, because she's addicted to TikTok and I'm addicted to Twitter. So yeah, we give each other crap.
Yeah, but I mean, like, is it really an addiction if you're growing an impressive following? I remember I was following you back when you had like hundreds of followers, and now you're at what now 16,000. pretty quickly. And it's just been impressive to see how quickly you've managed to be able to grow this following, and also just like how much attention your Twitter ends up getting. Like the amount of retweets from like very high up people. Like I remember you getting, like millions of views on something because like Donald Trump Jr. retweeted you, and you got like Jack Posobiec you're fighting with sometimes.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's the justification I tell to my girlfriend. But I just got retweeted by Glenn Greenwald.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
which was
I saw that.
But honestly, I think it's a little dirty the way that I've been able to blow up on Twitter. I called it digital arbitrage. It's seeing the price differential between like YouTube and Twitter. Obviously, like on Twitter or YouTube, if you go and you look up the Giuliani moment, no one, I mean, it's blown up like millions of views. But if you look it up on Twitter, there's nothing. So I was like, I was highly influenced by this video when I was getting into these ideas. Why not clip it and share it with everyone? And it's things like that really help amplify.
That is interesting, because oftentimes, even when we're just like preparing for the show, I'm like, I need a clip for something, and I'm just like, I'm sure Liam's tweeted about it. So I just scan through your account for it, and it's usually there.
You've gone from interviewing sources to being the source. So congratulations.
So law school, what's it like?
It's crazy. It's not what I expected. I honestly, because I have a philosophy background, I got my degree in philosophy, and I expected it to be more theoretical. I'm glad that it's not, but I expected it to be like a lot of debating with fellow students, and it's just the law. I mean, and I'm very thankful for that. Like, we're learning a lot. I'm reading at least 3 cases per class each night, and I'm definitely learning the skills around it. I can tell that it's changing the way that I think. It used to be like pulling teeth to sit down and read a long form thing. Now it's like, okay, I do this every day. So I really enjoy it. And honestly, even though my professors obviously don't share the same beliefs as me, same as undergrad, I'm actually pretty thankful with how they've been approaching the subjects, and maybe that'll change, but it's been good.
They've been demonstrating tolerance. Like when you write about from your perspective, they're very much open to hearing that.
Well, we haven't really had anything like that. We haven't really had any contentious debates yet. I'm learning a lot of like civil procedure right now, so it's pretty dry. I'm assuming like third year law might be completely different.
Cool. And so what was the light bulb moment? Like, why get into doing politics, journalism, philosophy, law? Like, what was the directional change to set your life in that orientation?
Well, it happened in high school for sure. I was slacking off a lot. At one point in high school, I had a 1.0, over 150 tardies. And at the same time, I was listening to, ironically, like people like Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, and those are the people that I looked up to. And they were just like, you got to like they were saying like personal responsibility. I was listening to Jordan Peterson as well. And then I took a honor civics class with Representative Lee Deming. He's currently a representative in the Montana legislature. And I was just blown away by it. I was instantly captivated, started getting A's in all of his classes on all of the exams. And he introduced me to Ron Paul, Tom Woods, and it was just a spiral from there. I mean, and I had discovered people like Eric July before that, and he was a big influence on me, but it was that class that really connected the dots.
Very cool. Is there anybody else like you in the law school in terms of the political orientation, or are you sort of a lone man out there in the libertarian world?
I haven't really branched out. I have met people at the University of Montana who are libertarian. I met one other guy who is conservative, and I identify with conservatives more. I just get along with them more than leftists. So that's been pretty nice. He's also pretty conspiratorial, and that's fun to have some conversations with him.
Those are the best friends.
Yeah. So I mean, he's worried about CBDC, stuff like that. So I'm assuming there's more, but I haven't met them yet.
And I want to know, like, so you got this Twitter following. You're obviously much younger than me, and you're a little bit younger than Kyle, and younger than Joe Biden quite a bit too. So
I'm not nearly as old as David.
I know, that's true. I am the old man on the podcast. As the Zoomer, how do we reach these kids? Like, what are your thoughts on kind of like the political culture of your generation?
It's an interesting question. I think it would definitely be taking advantage of the moment that we're in. the media moment we're in. And I think this might actually be a good pivot to the Milei conversation as well, is just taking advantage of populism, libertarian populism in the Rothbardian sense. He also, in the 90s, was suggesting that we needed a bombastic leader similar to Milei. And I think doing what you guys are doing in long form podcasts, I think that's the way that we're going to reach future generations. Cable news is dying. I think that's why that Tucker Carlson leaving was a very good thing overall for the conservative movement, the liberty movement. I just think long form conversations and taking advantage of media, clipping them and posting them on TikTok, clipping them and posting them on Twitter is absolutely the path forward.
That seems to be the interesting component to me to reaching young people, because you hear the trope all the time that like we have shorter and shorter attention spans because of social media. Do you think long form is really resonating with young people? Is that where they're consuming their news, like specifically?
I mean, not all of them. I get caught in the dopamine trap of just scrolling on TikTok and Instagram, but I try to avoid it. And I think that there is a large enough population out there that just wants long form content in general. I've definitely tried to have healthier social media practices. I know Adam Thuen was asking a question about that. And part of that is just trying to intentionally approach media and try to learn from it rather than just doom scrolling. I don't use Instagram very much anymore because it's just meme after meme after meme, girl in bikini next, and it's just dopamine hit after dopamine hit. And I think what that kind of encourages is short-term thinking, like you suggested. And I would encourage people to intentionally approach YouTube, intentionally approach podcasts, and use media to learn rather than to get a fix.
Yeah. I think the dynamic is the dynamic that we experience as advertisers on these platforms, right? Is that the short form is the advertisement for the long form, and that your true fans listen to your long form content and they support your short form content, use the short term content on the For You page, and then the viral moments to get your audience. And I think it's kind of that's the organic way it's kind of built out. When I look at all the successful podcasts that have come up in the last couple of years, it's either I heard about them through a friend, or I found their short form content first and then branched into their actual long form. Yeah,
that's another way that I help build my following on Twitter is I would take clips of my interviews with Scott Horton, and then he'd retweet it, and then there'd be hundreds of people retweeting it after that. So I think you're absolutely right. If you use the short-term content as advertisement, and then you direct people to the long-form content, that's how we need to be using social media.
Speaking of which, if you're on X, please follow us. We just broke a couple 100.
I think we just broke 100.
Yeah. Broke 100 followers. You got us by 16 times. But yeah, it's pretty new, and we're just trying to start to get
60 times.
It's fine. Math is not
it's a philosophy major. Come on.
True.
What was I saying? Jeez, you totally threw me off. Oh yeah, we do have a lot of our short clips on there now too. So we're trying to get out there in the Twitter game. That's for sure.
Yeah. If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thuen at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management, Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL Patriots.com.
Milei? What the hell's his name? Milei? I was just going to say Milei.
Milei.
That's what I said. God, that's the massacre. I'm talking about the Vietnam massacre. Javier Milei.
Yeah, not the Melee massacre. That's a very different thing.
Darker subject. This is a happy subject. It's a Thanksgiving special. So tell me about it. Who the hell is this guy? What's his background?
So
what's his story?
Milei is this. So his nickname growing up was El Loco, which means the madman, which I think really paints a picture of who this guy really is. And I'm sure most people have seen this crazy man screaming about the central banking in Argentina, right? But he was a goalie in junior football. He's the singer for a AC/DC cover band. He's an Austrian libertarian economist. The Economist, the publication, labels him as a a sex guru, a cosplayer,
and an economist.
and an economist.
Clearly the coolest economist that The Economist has ever covered.
Apparently he's cloned his dogs and named them after a bunch of Austrian economists. You know, like this is a very eccentric fellow.
Yeah, the eccentricness really comes together when you see Captain ANCAP. That's really what got me. It's like, oh, this guy knows how to market.
So
he's going all in.
He went to a comic convention, right? And he dressed up as was it General? I think it was General ANCAP or Captain ANCAP.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
in a black and yellow
I'm pulling it up.
bodysuit, and he was telling the kids that his mission was to kick Keynesians in the ass.
All right, so someone explain this costume to people who can't see it, and it also might explain ANCAP. So
I'd call it a mix between an economist, Batman, and Superman.
And Aquaman.
Yeah, we explained anarcho-capitalism the last time we talked about Milei when he had won his primary.
Yeah.
But just a brief refresher, it's kind of a tradition based out of Austrian economics. People like Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard, Lysander Spooner, that kind of like those types of economists, if you know who they are. And it's essentially kind of limiting government as much as possible, if not entirely, with a primary focus on things like property rights.
I think the best way to understand it is like conservatives and limited government people in general believe in the free market, or at least they say they do. ANCAPs believe in the free market, but also apply to like security services. So like if you believe in the free market in healthcare, you don't believe in Obamacare, you think the free market's best, ANCAPs would say, well, competition, if applied also to security services, competition applied to government and governance in general, will lead to better outcomes.
right, and to explain it, he's wearing a black and yellow cape and bodysuit here. The yellow represents gold, right, which is about the market, right? And black, and traditionally in flag iconography, is for anarchism. So it's like a market-based anarchism or an individualist anarchism. That's the anarcho-capitalist. That's where the word comes from. So that's why it's all black and yellow.
Is that why the pirate flag is black?
Yeah.
Because they're anarchist?
They're without state.
The Jolly Roger, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, they're stateless.
I love that. Didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a great book about explaining economics using pirates.
So
The Invisible Hook. You've got to check it out. It's wonderful. You've never heard of it before?
I have not.
Oh, it's so great. Yeah, it's an amazing book to explain it to somebody who doesn't really understand how.
I was thinking Thaddeus Russell's Renegade's History, where he talks about pirates. Yeah, but I've not.
That's mostly about them just being gay.
That's true.
It's just like, hey, did you know pirates are super gay? That's like the whole point of pirates.
So is it like, it's pro-pirate though? It's not saying that they were a bunch of criminals?
Well, no, it's more, the Invisible Hook is more about how rules and order can spontaneously order themselves, right? You don't need an authority, a centralized authority, to get rules and order. That's the idea. In institutions that you wouldn't expect, like when two pirate ships meet at sea, what's the rules of conduct? Well, those evolve spontaneously without any state. The rules when it comes to profit sharing on the ships was a market-based rule, right? Some ships were equal share, some were less so, but they all tended to be way more egalitarian than the mercantiles and than the Navy and things like that, right? So it's a very interesting case study of how pirates are like a way to think about how rules can spontaneously organize.
So, okay, so just to set the stage here, because this is a very interesting environment in which to paint a guy who was just elected president of a country. What is the environment that established the need or the precedent for the need for a guy with these kind of views?
All right, so this is the peso of Argentina, their money supply, right? This is the expansion of their money supply. So repeatedly, if you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, we've talked about the Austrian theory of the business cycle and the phenomena of the expansion of money as the fundamental driver of an increase in the price level, the general price level of goods and services in the economy. So if you go to there's also in the comments there, or not in the comments, right below there, this is the inflation rate in Argentina. Notice they're going through 120-something% inflation. That shows the environment in which they elected a guy who ran on eliminating their central bank, because they've inflated away the value of their currency. Now, his solution to that's interesting, right? Because the solution to that is dollarization, which basically means replacing the peso with the dollar, and then hopefully getting rid of their central bank.
So obviously 120% inflation is incredibly painful for people, and that caused obviously a ton of people to support him in like this populist movement. Can we explain what that is, populism in general?
What is populism?
Populism is often just kind of like a nonsense word that people use to criticize things.
Kyle deconstructing his usual words.
Populism, I mean, largely just kind of means like it's like of the people. So it's like usually like an uprising of the people, but it's often painted in various different lights because people are like, and I see this a lot in kind of right-wing circles and libertarian circles. Often there's certain wings of those camps that will kind of just like criticize populism just for the sake of being populism.
Yeah. So the best way to think about populism, in my opinion, is where do your ideas for politics come from? Do they come from a centralizing philosophy, such as in this case, anarcho-capitalism? In which case, he would not be a populist, right? Because his ideas come from his philosophy of politics, of the state being evil, of central banking being bad, of all these different things, right? Populists would say, the people of Virginia are for silver, so I am for silver. That's actually a famous quote. And what it means is I get my political views from representing this group of people who I am a champion of. That's populism. That's the truest form of populism. That's probably the best way to put it. If you look at what is the difference between a Democrat in the classical sense, like a lowercase d, like I value democracy Democrat, and a populist, there really isn't that much, right? In the case of like, I believe in the enfranchisement of people to vote, to have a voice heard in their politics, as opposed to that's just an inversion of that, which I believe I should be the person to represent those people. That's all populism is.
I'm curious, if a populist representative derives their power from representing the people, does that imply a necessary lack of inherent ideology or principle upon which they stand? They're just kind of a windsock, if you will, for whatever public opinion says.
There's always been a leadership criticism of populism in that sense, right? On the other side of it, what's the job of a representative? To represent. So there's always been like this different model, and we talk about in political science of like the representative model versus like the leadership model. Leadership model says you're a conservative and you just happen to be a Republican. The other one says I'm a member of the Republican Party and they elected me to be Republican, so I'm going to be the Republican that the Republicans expect me to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Another way that populism is generally used is just it's used to put on a spectrum of like populism versus elitism. So oftentimes, especially in like more recent culture, in political culture, you'll end up seeing like Bernie Sanders gets labeled as a populist, Ron Paul gets labeled as a populist, Trump gets labeled as a populist, because it's very much like going against the establishment. I'm not really sure that's really supposed to be the correct terminology, but it is how it is used in public parlance.
I wouldn't say that's the technical definition, but I think that's the way that it's been used when I said it. I said it earlier in the podcast, the Rothbardian populist sense. And I actually have a quote here, if you guys don't mind, from Rothbard, where he talks about the populist libertarian strategy. Because he's comparing it with the Fabian strategy of like the Cato types that are trying to infiltrate, get in think tanks and try to infiltrate government. He says that instead we need this libertarian or right-wing populism. He says it needs to be exciting, dynamic, tough, and confrontational, rousing, and inspiring not only the exploited masses, but the often shell-shocked right-wing intellectual cadre as well. And in this era, where the intellectual and media elites are all establishment liberal conservatives, all in a deep sense, one variety or another of social democrat, all bitterly hostile to a genuine right, we need a dynamic, charismatic leader who has the ability to short-circuit the media elites and to reach and rouse the masses directly. We need a leadership that can reach the masses and cut through the crippling and distorting hermeneutical fog spread by the media elites. And I think that describes Milei perfectly.
Right. Yeah, as far as like you're making a case that is particularly critical of the establishment. That's the sense in which think like Andrew Jackson would be a populist before populism was a real thing, right? In the sense that his general appeal wasn't to the elite New York banker, it was to the everyday farmer that was struggling under inflationism with the second bank of the United States.
Yeah. Gotcha. So this is much more oriented towards sort of that latter definition. Because obviously he does stand on a lot of principled things, anarcho-capitalist, ideals, libertarian ideals. Liam, do you want to like kind of run us down like what is it that this guy stands for, and kind of why this is so important for the country of Argentina?
Yeah, I don't think we can really understate how amazing this is. I mean, just think about it. Like we are all libertarians, anarcho-capitalists. We are all like obsessed with Murray Rothbard, and a country just elected a man who quotes Murray Rothbard, who quotes Ludwig von Mises, who quotes Friedrich Hayek, who quotes Lysander Spooner. I found a clip of him holding up Vices Are Not Crimes. That was one of the most influential books for me in high school. And I think it's just so exciting because I'm kind of reliving like me coming to libertarianism through him, because so many others are like Ben Shapiro and a bunch of Republicans in Montana politics were sharing videos of Milei, and they're kind of doing it to own the libs, right? They're not really paying attention to like the substance of what he's talking about. But like, it is exciting because I think it presents an opportunity for us in the media sphere to take advantage of that, to sit the Republican down and say, why is this so exciting? What is he saying about the central bank of Argentina? And what does that mean about the Federal Reserve? I think the most important thing that he's talking about is Austrian economics. He is an Austrian economist. You can look him up on YouTube, where he's actually presenting written papers on Austrian economics to university students. He's written essays on Austrian economics directed toward English readers as well. This guy is a follower of, the people that we look up to, and there are a lot of people out there criticizing him and saying, oh, well, like, we should be cautious. And I do believe that. I don't think we should put the cart before the horse. I think we should watch and see what he does. But, and of course, we shouldn't put faith in one man. But I think the most exciting thing is that the ideas are larger than the man himself, and someone who is representing our ideas just won and became a leader of a country. And that's extremely exciting.
Right. I mean, like, think about it. They have, out of the last 20 years, 16 have been dominated by the socialists in Argentina. And they've had 40 years to really take the country and drag it into a hellhole of 120% inflation. Like, Americans are freaking out about 6% on inflation. 120 is a nightmare, especially if you're young, especially if you're just starting out. So his ability to organize the youth, not in a direction of, I'm going to give you stuff, it's that I'm going to cut things worse than the IMF will, to restrain this madness and to pull back this inflation rate and do something about it. Additionally to that, I'm not just going to do that and then forget about spending. I'm going to tax spending. And that's why we got this really great video of him doing this. Now, does this have this audio over in English, or do I have to read it?
We'll read it. It's just him. It's him at a whiteboard basically saying all the things that he's going to cut. So it's pretty simple.
But are you going to read it in the Spanish
this definitely
accent?
shows the dynamic of like how high energy he is too. And I think why he's so captivating.
Right.
So he's at
Ministry of Culture.
Ministry of the Environment and Sustainable Development. It's out. Ministry of Women, Genders, and Diversity, out. Ministry of Public Works, out. Even if you resist. Science and Technology. Ministry of Labor, Employment. Ministry of Education. Indoctrination, he says.
Ministry of Transport. Ministry of Health. Ministry of Social Development. The thievery of politics is over. Long live damn liberty. Oh man, and he's got the cool glasses on. That's so awesome.
Well, and there's other things too. Like there's been tons of viral clips from him. Unfortunately, so much of it is in Spanish, obviously, so it's not exactly the greatest for audio listeners. But there'll be him talking with journalists, just like using kind of internet slang and calling people libtards and things like that. Like, it's pretty, it's very exciting. It's very appealing, I think, to the people that are feeling distraught by everything that's happening in Argentina, right?
Well, and it's confrontational, and it's pointing at the bad actors, and it's pointing at the people, and he's not doing it in like a, oh shucks, I'm sorry, but you messed up. He's like, no, I'm holding you accountable because you said this would bring prosperity, and it failed. And it's failed for 30 years, and we need to change the direction. And he's doing it with the kind of spice that actually works in the internet age. That's the other part of it. Like, he's really willing to point out the bad guys.
I think the point that you brought up earlier, that Americans are freaking out over 6% inflation, like, is a huge one, because I tweeted something and it blew up. I said, we finally have a leader of a country who is pro-Bitcoin, anti-central bank, is libertarian explicitly, is an Austrian economist. And then I asked people, like, what do you think, why isn't the United States like this? These are deeply American ideas. If you read For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard, he makes the case that these ideas really come out of the American Revolution. And I do believe that. So why isn't the United States ready? And many people were saying, well, it's because we don't have 127% inflation right now. And I'm just begging people, do not wait. Like you are feeling the inflation now. So I just urge everyone to learn about the Federal Reserve, because we're not immune from it. Like we could feel that here.
It's one of those things that, like, for years I was always like, inflation's going to come, guys, I'm telling you. And then when COVID hit, I was like, I'm telling you, shut down the economy, you print all these dollars, it's going to happen. Yeah. And then when it's happened, we have to take that opportunity to say, I told you so, and hold those bad actors accountable. And that's the thing that will actually build the next movement. Because it was after 2008 and when the financial crisis happened that I first discovered these ideas, right? Because you're just running along and all of a sudden all your dreams are gone.
Yeah, and those bad actors were saying it was all transitory, remember? Like that was the buzzword that they were using at the time. And then eventually they're like, oh, oops, got it wrong. You know, I guess now our target for inflation is 3% instead of 2% now these days. So
yeah, I mean, before the pandemic happened, like you can look it up. There's a record of it. If you go to my profile and you just type in inflation or Federal Reserve, like I kind of started to sound like Peter Schiff. I was saying that there was a crisis going to happen like months from now, and like this was at a time where inflation was not in the press. Like no one was talking about it. Everyone thought it was like some conspiracy theory, and now like you just look up inflation, like all the major networks are talking about it.
That's
the number one
important.
issue.
It was labeled by the press as a right-wing conspiracy theory. Yep. That was the talking point. It was a right-wing conspiracy theory, and then it was transitory, and then it's just like, oh, it's just what happens. Yeah. It'll be fixed soon. Fine.
Right. Well, it's the opportunity to really get people into a deeper thing that they miss out on, right? They just use money. They don't know where money comes from. They don't know why money exists. It's just the thing we do, right? So take that opportunity. And then we have, of course, libertarians are now criticizing him for advancing dollarization, which is an interesting component of that, right? Where they're saying, but this isn't anti-central bank. You're just moving the central bank to America.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people are presenting it as if he's like a puppet of the Federal Reserve, and I'm not entirely sure how that would work. But the argument that I've heard from people from Argentina who are commenting underneath my posts, they're basically saying like, and I think Javier Milei has actually admitted this in an interview. He talked about dollarization, and he just said that it's an instrument to get rid of the central bank of Argentina. And the way I've heard it is there's two different ways you can dollarize. You can do it either through force, or you can do it in a voluntary way, or a mix of both. You can make it voluntary at the beginning, where you just say there's competition of money, flee to whatever you want. And then the argument is, well, people will go to dollars because, I mean, that is stable. A stronger currency. It's more stable on the world stage.
You could either have 120% or 6% inflation, or 5%, 3% inflation.
Exactly. So the argument is that he's going to make it voluntary. People are going to flock to dollars. And then, that's how they would dollarize. And then maybe over time, then they would force it on people. But from what I've heard, he wants free banking. He wants competitive currency. He appears to be thoroughly Austrian and libertarian. I think, I mean, obviously there's questions about whether dollarization would be best for the country, especially like they probably have to take out loans from the IMF since they are in debt. They've defaulted on their debt like 10 times to the IMF. So there are legitimate questions, but there's also an aspect where since they're not printing the money in Argentina anymore, I've heard it argued that they're actually insulated from booms and busts because if they start to accept dollars over time, like there is kind of an economy with dollars that stays fixed as long as they're not taking in more. I don't know the arguments behind it, but it is interesting.
Do you want us to slow down on free banking and define that now, or should we head on?
I would like to actually know kind of what some of the criticism against him are personally.
Yeah, so I know there are obviously the mainstream press has defined him as far right, which is interesting, right? Because that just provokes, what do we mean by left and right, right? And that's correct. Left and right, where do those words come from, and why do we use that far right to describe someone who is an anarchist? Yeah,
I mean, I've said, and so I've interviewed Gerard Casey about this. He's a libertarian philosopher. He wrote some great books on libertarian philosophy. He lives in Ireland right now, and I love the guy. He's extremely charismatic. I highly recommend everyone check out his work in my interview with him. But the way he describes it is that libertarianism is neither left nor right. and the way that I like to think of it is that it's a very narrow legal theory. So there's thick libertarianism and then there's thin libertarianism. Thin libertarianism would just say you follow the NAP, the non-aggression principle. It's a question about when force is legitimate. And the answer to it is force is only legitimate when you use it in defense. Libertarianism opposes all aggression, which is, of course, force that is not in defense. So anything outside of that, libertarianism has nothing to speak on. Libertarianism does not speak on an individual's morality. It just speaks on this very, very narrow legal question, I think. That's how I like to position it. So that means that libertarianism is neither left nor right, but individual libertarians can be left or right. So I'm a conservative libertarian, but on libertarian matters, on legal matters, I will always go to libertarianism. Libertarianism will always provide the answer for me in legal questions. But in my personal life, on questions about drug use, on questions about religion, libertarianism has nothing to say about that. It'll have to come from elsewhere, in my opinion.
So is that where critics are calling him far right? Is that, he's made some statements that are generally anti-woke and he's against that sort of, leftist agenda? Is that kind of where they're deriving that criticism from?
I would assume so, but also it's not really clear what far right means. It seems like they never define it because Hitler's far right, but also ANCAPs are far right, apparently.
Which are completely opposite.
Yeah, how can you compare that?
Yeah, so the seating arrangements of the post-revolutionary France is maybe a bad model.
Yep.
Yeah, that is exactly
right.
That
For
bifurcation.
all politics.
That bifurcation is
Right,
how
it's
we
ridiculous.
completely
That's where the
define
idea comes from.
You're going to have to explain what that means.
Okay, so after the revolution, the glorious revolution, not the glorious, that's England, the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, they had a seating arrangement in the new parliament. And the monarchists were on the right and the liberals were on the left, like the more revolutionaries were on the left. That's it. That's where it comes from. Does monarchists describe Republicans?
Not contemporary Republicans.
No, not in any way. So what does right wing mean? What does left wing mean? Left wing in this case meant, okay, so imagine go to Joe Biden and say, Joe Biden, you're a lefty. So your position is to hang the last politician with the entrails of the last priest. That was the left wing of France in the revolutionary era. Right. It was anti-religion. It was anti-government in this very interesting way. It was a radical philosophy of those things. So nothing in what we do today makes any sense for that. So we use these terms without really defining them, and we don't even know where they come from. Ben, did you know where those come from? That where right and left came from?
I had no idea.
Yeah. So that idea, we have someone to like bounce these off of now. I love this.
He's our normie focus group.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, brother. So when I think about it, I tend to think about it not in left, right. What I tend to think about it is I think directions don't make a lot of sense. What I tend to do is just think in terms of theses of values, right? So libertarians hold a couple different values. Non-aggression principle, I maybe I'm a thick libertarian in that sense. I think that's actually encapsulated a couple different values that I think are as objectively true as the non-aggression principle, like the value of mutual benefit, right? Or the need for openness in a society to technologically progress, and like ideas like that are really important when it comes to balancing out political interests and thinking through like what ought we do, not just what shouldn't we do, but what ought we do.
On that point, really quick, I do think there is a big difference there, because if you put the non-aggression principle first, then you would say like, whereas you might say we should pursue outcomes that are mutually beneficial and stuff like that. I think that someone who is a thin libertarian would just say, as long as behavior is voluntary, it doesn't matter what the outcomes are.
Right.
So like a society that voluntarily chose to not allow immigration, which we know is not the best for economic outcomes, that would still be okay according to thin libertarianism, because they're just agreeing to, like, this voluntary community has agreed that they're not going to let anyone in.
Yeah, it's just that problem of aggregates, right? You're being a collectivist when you say the community decided,
Right.
Right. Because as soon as you do that, you're no longer using the nap. Right?
Exactly.
So you violate the nap in your premise.
I actually do think that's kind of the split, because there are, like, Adam Thuen has been on the podcast, and he kind of seems to be more collectivist and localist, but he still has some libertarian principles. I would say he might reject that, but I think he is libertarian.
We're going to hear about that in the Discord.
In his order of operations, he's a libertarian on the federal level, right?
Yep.
He's a communitarian on the local level.
Yeah.
Like, would be the way to think of Adam. I think you'd agree with me. So, anyways, we're getting to some weeds here, but that's cool. That's my point on left right is like, for example, like an example where progressives would say, whoever is the oppressor, oppression is bad. In that sense, libertarians agree with progressives, right? Because the ordering of oppressor oppressed, like that value set fits totally well with what we would think is like a tyranny, right? If the government was saying, hey, you can't get married to that person, they're the wrong skin color, you'd be like, that's bullshit, right? That idea is this, like that crosses these boundaries, and that's the sense in which it violates a left-right paradigm.
It depends on the progressives, though, too, because like progressives have their own spectrum of nonsense that also also occurs, right?
That's why I tend to think about it as value sets, right?
Well, no,
Sets of values.
it's one of those things where like these definitions at the end of the day, we're kind of at war about definitions on a lot of things, because like we can say the progressives believe one thing, but it's like, okay, the Hillary Clinton progressives are like the AOC progressives, because those aren't the same thing, right?
Well,
but in the same way that the right versus left on American politics exists, it's like it kind of helps categorize it, but it's very imperfect. It doesn't really work that well.
Right. Let me give you an example. If you look at it on a policy basis, fascism and progressivism are far closer together in the roots of their philosophy than any other two political theories in America, right? The basis of modern conservatism is liberal economics of laissez-faire, like Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, stuff like that, and like a communitarian approach to family and things like that. That's the best way I could try to put it, right? That conservative, like fusionist philosophy of jamming those two things together, neither have any roots at all in the progressive movement, which was America's branch of the National Socialist movement of Europe, which turned into both the fascists of Italy as well as, the Nazis.
They were bringing over Germans and Italians over to help flesh out the philosophy at the time, right?
And so like I'm a great book on this. You check it out. It's called Liberal Fascism by Jonah Goldberg. Jonah Goldberg has lost his mind on Israel and stuff like that, but he's an excellent political philosopher on the history of progressivism. Definitely worth checking out. Mostly because the resources in that book are very good. Yeah, go ahead.
Also, I would say just a funny source for how similar Nazis and progressives are would be Ryan Long's video with Danny Polishek, right? The woke guy and the racist agreeing on everything and becoming best friends, basically, right?
I think for people who are still kind of like stuck on thinking of spectrums and directions, I think something that was really helpful for me before I even became a libertarian, I discovered Matt Kibbe's series on Brave back in the day, and he talked about it as it's actually a spectrum from authoritarianism to libertarianism. And like the more authoritarian you get, of course, you're going to have more variation, because you can have like a lot of different kinds. You can have Hitler or you can have Stalin, but they're similar in that they use force. Whereas if you actually go more toward libertarianism, you start to agree on the legal questions. You might have differences on the personal views, like whether you're a conservative or a liberal in your personal life, or you're Catholic or you're an atheist. But like on legal questions specifically, you come to a point where you just agree that no force is legitimate. No aggression is legitimate.
I've heard it described very similarly to that, in that contemporary Republicans might use authoritarian tactics to impress upon you the way they think you should live your private life, whereas contemporary Democrats or liberals might use authoritarian tactics to require you to use your money in a certain way that they want you to do, right? So they're both employing authoritarianism to make you live your life in a certain way. So if you want to avoid that, you can really just kind of dial it in to libertarianism and make that consistent across all parts of your life, right?
The best articulation is, what is politics, right? Politics is, when is it just to use force, right? And if you put that on a scale, that's a more objective scale than left, right? And if you're gonna make right mean, the further right you go, the more anarchist, then we're on board, right? This guy qualifies. He's an anarcho-capitalist. but they also put fascists on the far right. So that's where it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And that's where they actually make up history for fascism, such as they start saying, oh, they were capitalists and oh, they were pro-family and they had family stuff. So then, therefore, anyone who says anything about pro-family is therefore fascist. Like it actually, we put our mental model of the left-right spectrum in the driver's seat to drive our philosophy rather than things that actually matter in philosophy, like what values are we talking about? What principles are we operating on? Things like that. And what were the actual policies of the fascists or of the communists or of the different, the laissez-faire liberals or the Whigs? Does that make sense? So it's not, it isn't, when you put a mental model in place of the principle, you drive strange directions. That's my point.
Yeah. And I think on the point of just left and right being undefinable, like we've experienced this just in the last couple of months. Like just a few months ago, we were identifying more with the right wing on the issue of Ukraine. And as soon as this war popped off in Israel, it's like, now we sound like leftists to those right wingers. And there's
depending on the right winger.
Depending on the right winger,
Right.
yeah. So there's actually a really good article by Rothbard I recommend. It's Confessions of a Right Wing Liberal. And he describes how right and left aren't very helpful if over time, if you stay in the exact same place, you can be identified as either right or left. And this was, I believe in the 90s, he thought that he should identify more with the right wing. And he came from the American right, the old right. But then he started to identify more with the anti-war left over time.
And that's because the right wing changed during that time period too, right? Like you end up having the National Review right wing and like the Buckleys of the world kind of really starting to push the Cold War narrative and shifting the right wing's mentality on things like foreign policy. Like the right wing didn't used to be that way. The right wing used to be actually quite anti-war, and then they shifted during the Cold War time.
The other one is the criticism from the right. Well, more like praise from the right. That's kind of strange, right? Because, and this kind of teases at the same issue. We got a guy who's up there talking about Spooner, and we have do you want to play the clip here on Spooner, where this book, it's Vices Are Not Crimes.
Yeah, so this was like the first thing that I discovered from Lysander Spooner. I highly recommend reading everything that Spooner wrote. He was a radical abolitionist during the Civil War era who actually inspired Frederick Douglass, and a lot of people think that he actually inspired Harper's Ferry. So he was extremely radical. He was opposed to the Fugitive Slave Act, and then the Civil War actually radicalized him, and he became an anarchist, libertarian anarchist.
Didn't he also try to start his own post office?
He did.
Didn't he end up getting like arrested because of this at one point?
Yeah, the federal government shut it down. And he also practiced law without a law degree, which I absolutely adore.
Yeah.
So it's great. And we'll have a link in the show notes about this video. It is basically articulates the case that because he's not in a anarchist situation, an anarcho-capitalist situation, because they have a state and because they have a welfare state in a healthcare dominated single payer healthcare welfare state, that there is a free rider problem and that there's a public expense problem for drug legalization, while he holds the values of that every individual has a right to do with their body that they want, that because you can then rely on the state to bail you out of that situation if you overdose or you do something that you don't want to do or you regret it or whatever, that other people have to pay for it. So therefore, he's kind of ordering his values and his virtues while he's saying, but my driving prescription is the state shouldn't be doing these things and individuals are sovereign. It's a very elegant argument.
Yeah, and I think something helpful just for the previous conversation too about what the non-aggression principle is about. The book that he's recommending in this clip, Vices Are Not Crimes, is extremely helpful at explaining this. Spooner presents the following framework. He says, vices are those acts by which a man harms himself or his property, whereas crimes are those acts by which one man harms the person or property of another. And vices, the very essence of crime, that is, the design to injure the person or property of another, is wanting. Unless this clear distinction between vices and crimes be made and recognized by the laws, there can be no such thing as individual right, liberty, or property, no such thing as the right of one man to the control of his own person and property. So in this book, I mean, and Milei is basically making the argument that you have an individual property right to use drugs, regardless of your personal views on them. The law has no say over vice. And that's what I find so fascinating about the right-wing reaction in Milei is we immediately saw people like Ben Shapiro say that this is an awesome reaction, or this is awesome news that Milei was elected. And you had people in Montana GOP politics saying the same thing. And in his podcast, in Ben Shapiro's podcast, he spent like 10 minutes on Milei. And in the beginning, he goes, well, he's not really a libertarian because he has some weird conservative views on drug use. But you just heard it. His view is that vices are not crimes.
I love it. A libertarian that can actually convince conservatives that he's not a libertarian. That's some serious Jedi shit.
Well, and it's also like it's a ally of convenience for the conservatives in America too, right? So you have 20 years of the super socialist party being in charge, and they have some change in direction in South America. It's a good thing. I think that's largely how they're seeing it, even if I'm sure they disagree with some things.
To that, I have a question. I mean, what is this potentially going to mean? What could this mean for the rest of South America or for the United States? Is this marking a shift in South American politics in some way, a meaningful shift?
I've long believed that we are going to start to see some massive kind of uprising happen in both Central and South America. I also think we're going to see it in other third world environments too. And I think a lot of it is just that a lot of these countries are going to kind of like jump over the industrial revolution that we've had, or not the industrial revolution, but just kind of like the large development. They can kind of like cut out all the nonsense that we've had to deal with, but also take on the benefits that we've gained. And I think that we're going to start to move a lot of these countries. Like, we've mentioned on the show before, Bukele in El Salvador. It's kind of the same thing. He got elected a few years back through a populist third party uprising as well, and he's very well liked there despite the IMF propaganda against him. I think that we're going to start to see this stuff happening more and more, and we've already had it in places like Peru. Peru is actually quite thriving, and probably the most thriving GDP wise in South America. We had it with Bolsonaro in a sense. He was a very Trump-like figure in Brazil that came in and started canning all of the corrupt politicians, and then he got gutted afterwards. But I think we're going to start to see these pockets starting to arise.
And upsides and downsides. None of those are endorsements of those folks. Like they have good policies and bad policies, and it's all mixed bags. It's all politics.
Well, and classic Americans are going to try to put very Americanized values on the situations that are going on in those places. Like I see a lot of criticism towards Bolsonaro, towards Bukele in El Salvador, and then also Milei, with people not really fully grasping all the dynamics that are actually in play in these places, because there are straight up civil wars going on in some of these countries with gangs. It's not like state on state violence or anything like that, but it's massive war problems. And then I end up seeing a lot of right wingers or libertarians basically saying that these people shouldn't be handling the problem the way that they're handling it. And it's just I don't know, man. These are very complicated situations in these countries right now with people with very little that just stumbled into executive power in these.
The two major criticisms from libertarians, I think, is that he's going to be tough on crime with the gang problems, and then also that he's supposedly in favor of Ukraine and Israel, and that he's kind of appealing to the West. But again, the context matters. Argentina is not the United States. If Milei was running in the United States and he was pro-Israel and pro-Ukraine, obviously I'd have some problems. But he's now the president of Argentina, which I think the only foreign policy consideration they really have is whether they're going to be sanctioned by the United States. So I think that he's probably playing along to get along, and also if let's say that Milei was running in the United States and his biggest issue was central banking and he wanted to get rid of the Fed, but then he was also saying, oh, I'm pro-Ukraine, pro-Israel. I might still vote for that guy because central banking props up all these wars. It props up the welfare program, sending foreign aid to all of these countries. So if he wasn't smart enough to realize that central banking is what's fueling the empire, I might vote for him anyway.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's you have to have an ordering of your values and what you care about, especially in politics, right? If you're more interested in domestic issues, you might just say what you need to say on foreign policy, and that's the kind of uncharitable pick here of the whole thing. And whatever is going to happen there, I think it's going to be complicated. One of the questions is constantly, are we overemphasizing his victory or over celebrating it? Because if he fails, then it looks like the whole philosophy has failed. And that's always the fear, right? And how should we think about when do we actually lean into the moment and say, yay, this is a good thing?
I'm going to go ahead and jump in here and say no, because we know libertarians have a hard time celebrating wins.
No, libertarians are too busy talking about how he's like a CIA op, like that. Like that's what's happening.
Exactly.
Here.
The funniest, lean into this one.
The funniest thing about that narrative is if we're at a point where the CIA is propping up people who are quoting Spooner and Rothbard, I think we're heading in the right direction.
Like then I guess I'm pro CIA then. I guess I don't know.
Like
It is confusing.
If we've gotten to a point where in order to propagandize us, they need to adopt our talking points, then great.
I mean, we've adopted one. I think we're maybe converting it in the process.
Yeah, and then do we own everything if it fails? Well, this is exactly the problem that always happens with conservatives and Republicans in America. Is like they will advance something, they'll pass the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and they'll own that for about 3 months, and then if any problem happens, they'll be like, well, I don't know, there were problems from the beginning, I objected to something. They don't defend anything. They never stand on what they believe in and articulate why they're right. And this is just while you will see the Democrats and the left do that almost over everything, no matter what, if there's someone else from their side that did a thing, they will defend it to the day they die.
You need good storytellers. You need people that shape the narrative correctly. You need people that do that well.
Which he doesn't have.
And so often people on the right...
We're doing it.
Yeah.
Well, so often people on the right or the libertarian types, they don't have that, and then they revert to operating within the frame that has been presented to them by the left.
Yes.
And we have to be frame creators, not frame awkward frame defenders that is imposed on us by our enemies, right?
Yeah, and like I said in the beginning, I really do not think we can overemphasize how cool it is that a libertarian was elected a leader of country by being uncompromising in their beliefs, right? In the United States, the closest we ever get to this is who's the guy in Arizona who's running? Masters?
Yeah, Blake.
Blake Masters. He wrote for Lew Rockwell. He used to identify as an anarchist. He used to identify as a libertarian. But in order to be effective, you can tell he's changing his messaging. He just released a podcast in favor of the war on terror, basically. He's saying that we need to go to war with Islam again because Islam is opposed to the West. And it's like when we have libertarians in the United States, besides Massey, they tend to water down their message if they want to get elected. Rand Paul, I mean, he's nothing like his father in messaging. He kind of talks about conservatism and stuff like that. He's not a true libertarian. This guy identifies as an anarchist, and he was elected the president of Argentina.
In public.
Yeah. And he was able to convince, to your question about Argentina politics as a whole, he was able to convince young population of this. He was very popular with younger generations, which is just incredible. And I think it just goes to show that these ideas can be popular. And unfortunately, I think it'll take a crisis in the United States. And it just goes to my warning in the beginning. I do not think we should wait until we have 127% inflation in the United States.
Additionally, what you need in a crisis, you need someone with a platform to articulate it at the right time, the right place, with the right amount of proficiency. Right. It's not enough just to have all the good ideas during the crisis. You have to be in the room. Right. So that's where it's you don't wait until there's a crisis. You start articulating now. You start practicing your articulation now. You start gaining the skills and the contacts and the ability to actually get out the message at the right time so that you can save the country and change the direction of it.
And I think we need to be the first, though I said that we can't overemphasize this, we need to be the first to criticize him if he ends up failing on these policies. If he ends up being a dictator, we need to criticize him as libertarians and say he is not a libertarian. But right now we can celebrate because the ideas are bigger than the man himself, and our ideas won.
Well, and one of the things and kind of what led into a lot of this too is if he's successful, and what are some of the reasons as to why he would not be successful, right? Because I don't think any of us fully really grasp exactly how Argentinian politics are and how their parliament separates from the executive branch. It's not like our form of government, but it's similar, right? So right now he has control over the executive branch right now, but how much support does he need from Parliament in Argentina to be able to actually get a lot of these things through, right?
And that's really where it's at. It's imagine if in 2008, Ron Paul succeeded in the Republican primary and then beat Barack Obama, no matter how absurd that looks. If that would have happened, how successful would have been as president? He would have done a lot of stuff with the executive branch, but he couldn't end the Fed because he needed Congress to change the code to end the Fed. He might have pulled back troops around the world. Argentina doesn't have that problem. They're not a global empire. So it's just like what he's going to be able to do. I think it's going to be, it's going to be interesting to watch what happens. The El Salvador situation, for example, Bitcoining their economy was what got all the coverage until the narrative flipped, and now it's just all about the incarceration, right? Mm-hmm. On the other side of that coin is the lack of violent crime in El Salvador all of a sudden too, right? So like those sorts of narratives, you need like that global infrastructure to like hold together a message about that and like interpreting what's important and kind of bringing that to the forefront.
Well, and at the time, that was when crypto was in the crux of a bull market, right? Too. Right. So like it was very trendy to be talking about that stuff. So it did capture a lot of attention because you had Bukele being like, we're gonna be mining Bitcoin with volcanoes and stuff, right? Like that was the stuff that was going. And he was getting on a stage and being like, we're creating Bitcoin City, like, and they're naming a city Bitcoin, and they're creating this like tech landscape for it, and with all this freedom and stuff, right? So but that is an example of capturing a narrative where it's at right there. And then obviously everybody's going to be like, crypto goes down, and everybody's going to be like, oh, Bukele, look at El Salvador now. But there'll be a bull market again, and he'll be able to capture that again, and it's going to help them at the time, and we'll end up seeing, because I'll be curious to see where Milei ends up standing on some of these things on kind of modernizing their economy and some of their financial networks and things like that too. Especially when the next kind of big rollout comes along with some of these things.
Sure.
The IMF put out propaganda to explain to the plebs what inflation is.
They didn't mention the money supply. I wonder why. The Biden administration bypassed 26 federal laws to build additional border wall in South Texas.
Somehow they still managed to blame Republicans for this horribly racist act. A Pentagon official was charged by federal authorities with promoting and furthering an illegal dogfighting ring in Maryland.
The Republican caucus did not appreciate the characterization. For all these stories and more, join the Discord.
To let us know what we should cover in the next episode of Human Reaction.
So do you want to talk about Israel Hamas? No, I'm kidding. It's a joke. Let's talk about OpenAI and Sam Altman.
Yeah, speaking of modern economy, we got some shakeups in the tech world.
I just love how Kyle summarized the story, which is effectively the Unabomber took over OpenAI and Microsoft saved everyone important.
They gave him a life raft, basically.
It's like a perfect.
That is what my notes say.
It is so good. I mean, it's like it gets you everything you need to know. So first, factions of AI, right? And we've talked about this a little bit before, but it's a helpful reminder about what are the different factions and mental models about those factions. Kyle, do you want to give us a summary since you're our tech bro, our penguin expert?
So the kind of the tech landscape is really built up around these different cults. In the same way that politics is, right? Like there's different
factions.
cults.
Let's call them factions. It's a little less charged.
No, I think it's more appropriate to call them cults just because of how they actually are. But you end up having, you have these effectively the effective altruist types. And a lot of those kind of cross over and blend with the decelerationist, the decels. If you see that word popping up around like social media, the decel means decelerationist. And it's the people that really want to slow down the progress of AI because of like a Terminator situation. And we've talked about that on the podcast before of how there are like legitimate people that want to like drone strike rogue data centers and things like that. Like there's these, it is a cult. Like I don't there's no better way to describe it. And then you end up having the people, kind of the counter revolutionaries, which tend to be more in the crypto space, and people that call themselves in the AI space effective accelerationists. These are the Mark Andreessen types. These are the Martin Shkreli types, who we've talked about on the podcast before. So what you end up happening here is, so last Friday, literally like hours after we were done recording our previous podcast, you have Sam Altman gets fired from OpenAI from the board. They decided to just can him. And so Sam Altman's been very important because of, you have something?
Just CEO of OpenAI, right?
Yeah, he's
Got
the CEO.
Fired by the board. Yeah, I just want to make sure it's clear he's the top dog.
And he helped start OpenAI. So OpenAI is ChatGPT. Everybody's heard of it at this point, right? And he helped start OpenAI with help through funding from Elon Musk back in the day when it was a nonprofit company. So he has since taken it for profit, but his board of directors has effectively fired him in that. And then kind of the storyline after this is you end up having most of the employee, or a lot of the employees there, all saying that they are going to leave too if he's not reinstated. So the board came in and was like, hey, we want to hire this Mira woman and bring her in. And they're like, we're leaving if Sam doesn't come back. And so they're like, okay, we're gonna rehire Sam. We're gonna bring him back on. And then Sunday night, or I guess Monday morning at like 1 a.m., I was up watching this stuff in Twitter Spaces when this was going on. You end up having Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft, puts out a tweet at 1 a.m. saying that they have brought on Sam as the CEO of their AI division. And they're bringing on Greg Brockman, who is also a fellow founder, and then also a whole host of other people. And Microsoft is bringing them on to their team, which is actually bigger than OpenAI's team. And this all happens before markets open. So within 48 hours, you end up having this incredibly baller move from Satya Nadella to bring on probably somebody who I wouldn't be surprised becomes the CEO of Microsoft after him.
Wow.
I just want to clarify because I read something about that statement being a bit of an overstatement from Satya Nadella, that they hadn't actually settled on a deal. He kind of rolled it back in the morning and said, well, it's not totally final.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I don't believe it is actually 100% there yet, but it's pretty much all but legal contracting is essentially official.
And not to mention the psychological effect is what's important, right? Because
Right.
it puts Microsoft in this role. It makes them look like they're helping Sam, who looks like the victim in this situation. And the important thing here is that the reasons for the board were vague and opaque, and they were largely understood as the board are the people who are very afraid of AI. They're the people who are worried about Terminator. And Sam Altman is more like, we need to make sure AI serves humans, but he's not a decelerationist, but he's not like necessarily like an accelerationist. He's kind of, what do you call it? The human alignment. Right?
Yeah.
Well, so there's like three schools: alignment, decel, not incel, excel. The incels, it's a whole different problem.
That's a whole nother. Well, and the new CEO of OpenAI, who they're going to be bringing on here, his name is Emmett Shear. He's the former CEO of Twitch, which is like the live streaming gaming platform.
Oh, that makes sense.
And he is a very hardcore decelerationist.
Really?
He was asked what his standpoint was on AI, and he said, if it's on a spectrum between 0 of like completely pausing and 10 as like full fledged, he's a 2, is what he said he is.
Okay. So where do you fall in this, Kyle?
I'm effective accelerationist all the way.
So you want
He's a 10.
You want AGI?
I'm like
tomorrow.
a 9 or 10.
You just want to send
Yeah.
it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Have you followed Spencer Schiff's take on this at all?
No, I haven't.
Like he makes the argument that we are just going to like abolish booms and busts with AI, and Peter Schiff is just freaking out about it. But
Peter Schiff would be.
Yeah.
Because Spencer's way more, Peter Schiff, the big gold bug. I think a lot of people know who Peter Schiff is, but Spencer Schiff is his son, who is a very technophile, like he's very tech savvy,
Yeah,
pro Bitcoin,
super pro Bitcoin, while his dad is like super anti Bitcoin,
and is entirely all just gold is the only answer. Where his son is very much like Bitcoin's the only answer.
Thanksgiving's gonna be awkward. So that wouldn't work though. To be clear, AI can't know what's inside your mind until you like give it access to that. Right?
What wouldn't work? The eliminating booms and busts with AI.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Because you can't. The reason why booms and busts happen is because you can't centrally plan. You can't centrally plan because it's the internal psychology of the consumer that matters when it comes to predicting the future. And only prices can do that. Only prices can align that because it isn't designed by anybody.
And I don't think it would get over the problem of like just like the example of the master builder that Mises and Rothbard talk about, that like when you increase credit, you're creating you're actually kind of creating a hallucination effect where people are high off of high credit and they don't really understand how much savings is in the economy, so that they start to build projects that end up like taking much longer than they have the savings for. Mm-hmm. So like they build, if you're talking about a master builder who's building a house, they end up building the framework of a house much bigger than what they have the material to finish with. They're under like this high credit and they actually don't have the savings underneath it to complete the project.
And the AI can't know that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Because the savings fund is your sense of your future prosperity and available resources being there because other people are saving, but that price doesn't exist.
But can't the AI predict?
That's always the question with prediction, right? Right. It can. I think we've proven with ChatGPT that AI is pretty good at predicting of like looking at a large amount of information and then like trying to solve your needs.
It's like synthesizing information together.
Right. But coming to a price, the information there is all the subjective preferences of all the consumers in the country. And how would it know that?
Yeah, this is the problem with mainstream economists, and this is actually what Javier Milei wrote about in that article directed to English audiences. He says that mainstream economists think of human preferences as being fixed. They assume what human preferences are over time, with like utility functions. They try to predict what people will prefer over time, but like we can't even predict what we will prefer in the future.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Interesting.
Another element too, and here's actually kind of like an interesting tie-in with Javier Milei here, is one of the big things about Javier Milei is talking about how much like the left wing in Argentina just like destroys everything that they touch, right? And I think that this is really the throughput too with the effective altruists and like the World Economic Forum, Davos types. They're all kind of the same, hodgepodge together in this. Like they just also happen to be the decelerationist, largely the people that kind of follow that train of philosophy. Is they seem to just destroy everything that they touch. Is the effective altruists. Like Sam Bankman-Fried from FTX. We talked about this like a month ago when he went to jail. He was an effective altruist. He was part of this camp, right? The decelerationist that are in this board takeover at OpenAI. This is the same type of philosophy. It's the same thing where when Elon was on Rogan talking about the death cults that formed in San Francisco and kind of infiltrated or were part of the uprising of these social media companies and censoring everything. Same people, same philosophy, same people, right? Mm-hmm. Like they seem to be going in and kind of just destroying everything, or it's the Silicon Valley bank collapse. Right. Same people, just happen to be all part of the same ideology. All of these things, it's like they're misaligning the incentives of all these different entities that are really creating the new technologies of the future. And all of those, OpenAI was valued at $86 billion last month. Now, after all this, that's all gone. like OpenAI still exists, right? Yeah. But nowhere near the same valuation that it was back then, a month ago.
And Sam Altman was just on a huge media tour, right? Mm-hmm. So his name identification salience went way up. A lot of people know who he is now. It was just ChatGPT and OpenAI, but now it's Sam Altman is like a face that people recognize and know. So that's kind of changed a lot of the game as well.
I'm curious. Skeptic in me is flagging some stuff about OpenAI being previously a nonprofit and then sort of through very nebulous means becoming a for-profit. And I don't know
the exact dynamics around how all that went down.
If I remember right, it has to do with about whether or not they were going to develop an open source AI tool, right? When that means that you get to see everything that goes into the AI, right? And that also means you get to copy it and make your own, right? The problem with that is, and that was like, according to Elon in one of his interviews, the reason why he was one of the first starters on that project was because he wanted to compete with Bezos and the other kind of high level folks involved in this space that are very much in that death cult, as he sees it, where it's like that I remember being more like an anti-transhumanist argument.
Sure. So
where it's like he's a transhumanist in that he wants you to compete with the AI by allowing you to control computers with your brain, right? Mm-hmm. That's what
his exact opinion is: if you can't beat it, join it.
Right. But what he's worried about is like the death clock, AI scenario. So his idea to try to solve that was actually a really good one. Is open source it and allow anyone to get access to the model, and then therefore you can make the AI that best suits your needs or suits a more narrow use function.
Elon's biggest concern is the centralized nature of these companies and housing all of this technology without us not knowing what's going on with it.
Right.
It's much more of a centralization factor of that is his concerns. Right. Because if you end up just having like OpenAI and then they go to Congress and they're like, yes, please regulate us, and then they're having like these secret agreements with like military contractors and things like that's where things start to get kind of crazy, and then the public has no idea what's going on, right? And a lot of that starts to become a government problem, from a libertarian standpoint, right?
So his solution was an open source software, which is very different than closed, right? One is proprietary; it's held behind. You don't get to see how it works. The other one is open to the public.
And Sam was opposed to Elon in that.
Well, he was hired by Elon, and then the board overthrew Elon, and then they turned it all private, and then started to decelerate. And it does make sense if you notice, in the sense of like ChatGPT's gotten really slow and kind of hard to use in the last couple weeks. So I don't know if that was really what was going on, if that's everything to the story, but there's definitely like a problem with the tool that's happened. So I don't know.
To me, it almost seems like, I mean, the question I have is Sam Altman like jumping ship, right? Was he forced out, or does he want to leave? Because he can't do what he wants to do, right? I mean, and I think that's probably the case, right? If he's an accelerationist and the board are decelerationist, it will benefit him to go to Microsoft, not just because it allows him to do what he wants to do, but it also clears up the confusion around, well, OpenAI, for-profit, non-profit, this or that. Like all of a sudden he's just with a corporation that wants to give him all the resources he wants to do whatever he wants.
So some of this could be just like crazy corporate warfare and 8D chess from Satya Nadella over at Microsoft too, because he pulled similar tactics last year with the acquisition of Activision Blizzard, who's like the gaming company that like World of Warcraft and things like that, and the Activision Blizzard got riddled with sexual harassment lawsuits, just crazy lawsuits, and like all of their products started to, like their stock was declining, and then Satya comes in and acquires them with a full cash buyout of $68 billion, and now that entire gaming like monopoly, almost in a sense, monopoly is not the right word, but like megalith, is now under Microsoft, right? And they're all of that stuff's finalizing at the end of the year too, and Bobby Kotick, who has Epstein ties, is dropping at the end of the year, and all this stuff, right? So like there could just be crazy corporate warfare that's going on, and now they've acquired one of the biggest names in AI, right?
So the question is this a good thing or not? From the position of a philosophy of freedom that says what we want is AI that allows me to better solve my needs, right? What's going to produce that outcome? And does this development with Sam Altman create the conditions for that?
I really don't know. I think the open source stuff is going to be the most important. And I'm interested with what X is doing with Grok, with their new LLM, and kind of the AI development that exists there.
Did you see Lex Friedman reading his questions to Grok about Elon?
No.
To Grok, it's hilarious. It's great. Check out Elon on Lex Friedman podcast. Really funny.
Because one of the big problems with things like ChatGPT or Midjourney, like some of the image creators and things like that, is the censorship side, which is so clearly happening like top down on them. So like I think the more decentralized we end up getting and the more open sourced we end up getting on these things, the better we will be off. And luckily, that is happening in the Elon front. I'm not convinced that will happen on the Microsoft front. At the end of the day, it's just like we're moving it to Microsoft.
it's
like,
Microsoft,
right?
Not going to be open. So,
nope. But Redmond, Washington will get even wealthier, I suppose.
I don't know. The current Microsoft AI Bing is not that good. Like, I'm not impressed by it.
Yeah. I've never used it. Have you used it?
Yes, I've used pretty much all of them, and ChatGPT is far better than everything. I have not used Grok yet.
What's your favorite, Liam?
I only use ChatGPT.
Yeah. And right now that's the only one really to use, in my opinion.
I also use Bard, which is
I've had trouble with Bard. It hallucinates.
It totally does.
So I've asked it varying questions like about like this Epstein or stuff like that, and Bard seems to produce better answers
that's interesting.
than ChatGPT. Yeah.
Interesting.
That's interesting.
Well, because ChatGPT is limited to the input from like pre-September 2021, right?
Yeah.
Bard has the entire corpus of the internet today that it can draw from, which also creates a lot of variability.
Now, I'm not a tech guy. I'm wondering, so there were concerns about like supercomputers and crypto, like supercomputers solving all the mathematical problems,
Encryption and stuff.
And basically like it would get rid of the value of crypto. Is there a similar concern with AI?
I think both fall into the same dynamic, and that there's going to be an arms race. Like in the same way, the way to almost think about it would be, so a lot of people are putting a lot of focus on we have to decelerate AI because like, for instance, like you could ask these LLMs to, how do I make a bioweapon? And it'll synthesize everything from its training data and put it together. And it's like, oh, here's a way you could do it. Right. And like all that information already existed. We just have a tool that helps synthesize it better now. And a lot of people are putting a lot of energy into like, we have to stop it from synthesizing data for just random humans to be able to use, when really we should be using the thing to help with the defensive side of that, of helping to like, how do we create better computers to stop with, like quantum computing hacks and things like that in the future? Like, how do we use these products to help us resist bioweapons or cyber warfare and things like, we should be using it as a tool to help us rather than decelerating the tool itself. Right.
And I think actually what you're more articulated is a concern over quantum computing. Less so than on crypto, right? Because what large language models are really great at doing is going out, grabbing stuff, and helping people solve intellectual needs, I guess would be the right way to say it, like how to formulate a press statement or something like that. Quantum computing is a much bigger fundamental shift in how computing works, right? Rather than ones and zeros, you can get zeros and ones at the same time, right? So it allows you to fundamentally double on like the base physical level of what you're able to do.
There's a whole lot there that we probably don't have the degrees to go into.
I'm not an expert on quantum computing, but it's a huge change if they can actually get it to. It's been in development for like 30 years. I mean, I remember reading about quantum computing in the 90s. So I don't think it's always been one of those technologies, much like nuclear fission, that's always right around the horizon. But that said, there have been some recent developments on it that are quite interesting when it comes to actually developing useful applications of it.
Well, and I view AI very much like I view it as like a Second Amendment issue, really, as like everyone should be able to have the right to have this, because it can be used as a weapon, but it can also be used as defense. So like it's almost like, should everybody be able to own a nuke kind of a question? And it's like, like if the state has it, do you let the citizens have it? Like, I actually think that's the realm of the dialogue that politically should be around the AI type of thing, right?
I think it's close to like the auto-loading rifle in the current form, right? I mean, like, because the
nuke is just the most extreme example, right?
Yeah, right. And even then, like nuclear technology, like nuclear like power production plants are run by civilians all the time. Now they have a military oversight and stuff like that, but we give that technology to civilians all the time. It's just that it's that function of. And I really like the Andreessen articulation of this is we need a Second Amendment for AI, because AI is what's going to defend you from bad AI. So it's the good AI. And that's where we need to play the Terminator 2 theme. Dun, 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 dun. Like that's the best analog here, right? In Terminator 2, the AI comes back from the future to defend John Connor from the evil AI, right? That's how to think about it.
Well, it's like the framework on the political side would be, do you want to have an AI that everybody kind of has access to that is like completely regulated by the government, or do you want to have your own personal AI, right? That you can kind of manipulate how you want it to be, and then you could use it for your own defensive measures if you need to.
I think the key question there, Kyle, is can you, especially to your Second Amendment point, can it be a right for you to have access to someone else's bank of computers that run the AI, right? To have your own AI that's really your own AI, you need to have your own compute.
Well, that's interesting.
But that's the problem. The Biden regulations limit compute. So even if you wanted to build your own, you can't, and up until a certain degree, and then you got to do all those reporting requirements and all this, bootlegger Baptist problem.
Well, screw Biden anyway.
But he is the president, and he's trying to put things into law.
Yeah, right.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Zesty Beverages. They're on a mission to the standard American diet by crafting drinks with fewer calories and more nutrients from real food. Their lineup of delicious offerings now includes Electric Peak Yerba Mate, postbiotic sodas, keto-friendly, ready-to-drink margaritas, and hard teas. Wondering what a postbiotic soda is? Well, head on over to zestybev.com to learn more and find a retailer near you. Once again, check them out online at zestybev.com. That's zestybev.com.
All right. So last off, we got X versus Media Matters. Okay. I just want to say this. This is so delicious. It is the best thing to happen to me since the birth of my third child.
Oh, wow. This is a big one.
I mean, think about it.
Media
Matters has been a pain in our rear ends for years with their bad faith, terrible research. I mean, I like how you put in here watchdogs. No one uses that term anymore. If you notice, they used to call Media Matters a watchdog organization. Now they call them a research organization, right? It's so manipulated. It's so ridiculous. It's like the Southern Poverty Law Center being a neutral nonprofit. It's absolutely absurd. So anyways, what happened? Now that I told everybody that this is great.
Well, so I guess should we start with the original interaction on Twitter?
No, this is it doesn't. Yeah, you need to get into the controversy. We kind of talked about this last time a little bit.
We glossed over it.
But yeah.
So basically, this all started because of there was a guy who tweeted and commented on something saying, and this has to do a lot with everything that's going on with Israel, Hamas, and everything, where you have this. Okay, this is okay. It's zooming and everything on the background. Okay.
What this is, it's a guy who's tweeting about an ad from the ADF, Anti-Defamation League, which is a group, and we talked about this a bunch last time. We never defined it. The ADF is a group to fight anti-Semitism, right? So and they're super liberal. We did talk about their definition of racism. They put out an ad, and it's two like middle class white dudes, like a father and a son. And then he's kind of confronting his son about him saying Hitler was right on the internet. Obviously, his kid was being a troll, and it's kind of putting but trolling is really hurtful, and you shouldn't do that. So you should be the good dad that holds your son accountable, which might be the right thing to do. You might need to hold your son in line, but this guy, that wasn't the controversial thing, is this guy's response to it.
Yeah, and he says, okay, Jewish communities have been pushing the exact kind of dialectical hatred against whites that they claim to want people to stop using against them. I'm deeply disinterested in giving the tiniest shit now about Western Jewish populations coming to the disturbing realization that those hordes of minorities that support flooding their countries don't exactly like them too much. You want truth said to your face, there it is. And Elon Musk responded to this kind of random guy. You have said the actual truth. And this created a massive firestorm. And I guess what does this guy actually mean with what he's saying here? I think a lot of people were confused about what he was actually saying.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like an echo of the same sort of dialogue that we were having on the silence is violence sort of articulation from Candace Owens from last week, which was that the people who were funding universities didn't say anything when Black Lives Matter was saying kill all white people. Now everyone's losing their minds because people are saying pro-Palestinian things and also saying some very hurtful things about Jews. And additionally, actual anti-Semitic violence that's happening around the country that a lot of people are concerned about. And so this guy's kind of saying look, I get it, but you didn't say anything about this. And many of the people who were saying this originally, who are actually saying some anti-white things, were Jewish. And so my criticism of this guy is he's being kind of a collectivist. He's kind of putting these people into giant groups, and he's poking at them as if they're one actor, when these are diverse situations going on here that he tells a story, but I'm not sure it's a comprehensively true story.
But what comes from here is basically Media Matters drives this massive ad pullout, and you end up having Apple, IBM, Disney, Comcast, Lionsgate Entertainment, Warner Brothers, Paramount, to name a few.
They do this ad pull up because Elon agreed with this guy about this point. That's the point. They said Elon's an anti-Semite, so therefore pull your ads. And
another added onto it, Media Matters does this research. Because they're internet researchers, right? they're researchers. And they do this research where they found that all of these companies, and then they go to these companies saying this, that their ads are being placed next to Nazi propaganda and things like that on the platform. And what then is found out later, and this is where it gets kind of juicy and why Elon Musk or X Corporation is suing Media Matters, is because what it turns out Media Matters did is they created a bunch of brand new fresh accounts and followed all of these bad actors and these Nazis and things like that, and just refreshed over and over again until they got those ads next to them to use those ads and present them to the media companies. And Twitter brought forward kind of the receipts on this, showing that this happened.
Wow. Wild.
Everyone who's been in politics for the last 10 years has known Media Matters is an absolute bad faith actor. So it's so great that they got caught red-handed doing some of this.
David Brock, the founder, started it in John Podesta's office. That's where Media Matters started. Yeah. And he was the chief of staff for Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And they put out and then Elon's now suing them. And so they put out this, fainting cows, Elon is now threatening us. And he basically came out with a pretty devastating lawsuit, as well as a lot of arguments that they are both evil as well as, obviously liars.
Yeah, Media Matters says, far from the free speech advocate he claims to be, Musk is a bully who threatens meritless lawsuits in an attempt to silence reporting that he even confirmed is accurate. Musk admitted that the ads at issue ran alongside the pro-Nazi content we identified. If he does sue us, we will win. And this is them responding, leaving out the context of them creating these accounts, right?
Right. Additionally, the amount of people who are actually Nazis are so small. What are they talking about? Like how many, they made the pro-Nazi YouTube accounts and then made the content and then boosted them?
No,
to
they
being
did
next
follow like people that are legitimate Nazis, but they
got
made
it.
fresh accounts and followed those people so that their stuff was
Got it.
Crossing their feed, right?
Yeah, okay.
And then they refreshed multiple times, and Elon Musk with the data showed that there were these like multiple ad refreshes that were going on. Right?
Okay, so but like the Taliban is on Twitter. Like, don't ads run across from Taliban content that's like talking about doing terrible things to women or something like that? I mean, like, I don't know what the Taliban actually tweets about.
And what kind of room IQ temperature person says, I see two things on my line, and therefore the ad necessarily supports the thing that's also in my feed? It's like, what a crazy argument is that? It's like,
no. This is interesting internet trivia. That is how the pop-up ad was created. In the early internet, ads were randomly run. They weren't like selected for alignment to content.
Sure.
On like GeoCities and like those first like few, internet hosting platforms. And you would have like ads for like really objectionable adult content running at the top of like Ford Motor Company's website or something like that. And they did not want that. So they created the pop-up so that the ad was very visibly separate from the content.
Well, also they have like, that's what Google AdWords and all those kinds of tools are for too, is like to make sure you get ads for the things that you care about. And
they're much more targeted
appropriate things on the sites.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
To the consumer themselves.
And then additionally, like in the space of Twitter, right? I'm sure Nazis want to buy Microsoft Windows, right? It's just like I'm kind of confused here. Like what do they expect? They're just like we just don't want to sell anything to these people. Like
a Nazi would want to buy a PC.
Well, everybody needs a PC,
guy,
right? Everybody needs a computer. It doesn't matter what your political alignment
they don't
is.
deserve banking, computers. I'm sorry, Liam. I talked over you, buddy.
I was just going to say, like who scrolling through Twitter sees an advertisement and says, "Oh, well, they must agree with the tweet right above it." Like everyone knows, like if anything, they're going to like have some shame because it's going to be some like weird sexual ad, and it speaks on their preferences.
Yeah, the ad is targeted to you, the viewer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the interesting things too here is, sorry, my notes here is that there's been a counter boycott that's formed here. And we have, so you have a bunch of companies coming in and saying that they are going to increase their ad buys or start their ad buys on Twitter in order to support, or X, formerly known as Twitter, where you have, so companies and individuals pledging ad spends on X in support of free speech in the wake of the misleading Media Matters hit piece. Andrew Tate has pledged $1 million per month. And Top G is all right.
Hey, one observation about this that's really interesting. You look at Cobra Tate, who's a huge Palestine supporter and very clearly very critical of Israel. The Babylon Bee, which is very heavily pro-Israel and has been. And they make some
Babylon
jokes
Bee.
Let's
actually just lay out so some people that you would have heard is the Babylon Bee has pledged $250,000 in ad buys. Tim Pool $250,000. Benny Johnson $50,000. Censored.tv, I don't know who that is, $40,000. The Quartering $25,000, and it goes on. But there's been more since then.
I want to know who that guy
I don't know who Donut Operator is, but he's offered $10,000.
Well, hey, look, we're going to pledge here and now today that we are going to continue to spend $8 a month on our verified badge in support of Twitter because of this. That's how based we are here at the Human Reaction Show.
But it is just interesting to watch, and it's more so like zooming out for a moment and seeing, again, like sort of like how we're describing the factions in AI, but like seeing the factions on this like large scale, the internet, social media environment, and seeing how this is all playing out here and who's giving money. And, it's just interesting to kind of see it's like chess pieces on the board and how they're all kind of aligning with themselves on what side and things like that. Yeah.
super internet wonky stuff here for you guys at home who are like, who cares about any of this? Like, what's the relevance here? Why does this matter? What are the broader implications?
The only place on the internet right now that you can get non-filtered content, on behalf of the FBI is TikTok and Twitter.
Oh, that's gonna hurt a lot of right wingers in the gut. Is that TikTok is?
But I get it. I mean, and you got a lot of people saying, "Oh, they host stuff that is not critical of Hamas," and it's like, okay, I get it. And then that's wrong. You should criticize Hamas
or OBL.
Yeah, right. We could talk about that phenomenon, but exactly that going viral on TikTok. Can we say his name? Is it okay? Is it like? Is it like?
I don't think so.
I was gonna say, is it like Voldemort? We can't say it.
I have no idea.
The FBI just starts listening in right there, like, oh shit, that is why it matters, right? Is because the internet is meant to be open. The dream of the internet was always a free place where people can connect and share ideas and talk to one another and reach audiences that you otherwise wouldn't be able to without an intermediary. And what we've discovered through the Twitter files is that the intermediary isn't Meta, it's the FBI that is saying, this is your reach, or you don't get to be, you're banned now, right? That's the problem. And the only places left on this digital frontier where people like us, like Liam, people who have a message, who are trying to help people integrate and find a philosophy or a politics of meaning to drive truth into the media narratives that are out there and fight back against the kind of corporate and government interests out there. We only have so many channels, right? And these are two of them that really matter to reaching people all over the world with a message of freedom.
Yeah, Tucker Carlson came out with a video today, a speech. I don't know where he gave this speech, but it was about this phenomenon. And he mentioned that like Media Matters has tried to censor information like who built the pyramids. Like there was this guy who was suggesting that there was a previous civilization that built the pyramids, that there were, and it's just like, why does Media Matters care about that?
Is that Graham Hancock?
Media Matters went after Graham Hancock.
Well, I mean, when his documentary came out, which is non-political, right? Like he got smeared as a white supremacist and things like this because because of suggestions that he was making about the research that he had done for his Apocalypse Now documentary, right? I wonder if that was Media Matters. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Like why do they care about that?
Yeah. Must be true.
Good question. Why do they care about that?
Must be true. Turning the frogs gay.
And it turns out they were.
We all know it was built by aliens, guys. Okay, so that's it for today, guys. That's it. We all know the pyramids were built by aliens.
And they're turning the frogs gay.
And they're turning the aliens are turning the frogs gay?
Well, it could be.
Yeah.
We don't know. Inconclusive.
We don't know what's doing that.
We'll have to solve that problem.
It was atrazine.
Next time. Well, yeah, but who created atrazine?
Probably a scientist. A chemical.
Might be a lizard person. You can't say he's not.
You can't say it's a good, fair point.
I liked this tweet from you, Liam, but it's not on what we were talking about, but it is on what it is on the Tucker Carlson clip here.
We're just gonna end by dunking on Ben Shapiro again. I
think it's not a bad idea to just dunk on Ben Shapiro every now and then. You got to put him in his place. And this goes in the line with things that we were talking about last episode. Is Tucker Carlson is kind of wondering about what ever happened to facts don't care about your feelings from Ben Shapiro.
And it used to be our first defense. You would say, well, in fact, there was a guy who used to say, facts don't care about your feelings. Changed his views on that recently. But that remains true. You
should go to the post below this and look at the quote that I included. It's pretty large, but I think this is actually really important. I grew up listening to Ben Shapiro, so like 19-year-old me is freaking out right now. I'm really upset with Ben Shapiro, and I should have known. I listened to him on for culture war stuff and domestic issues, and I actually think he's fairly libertarian on domestic issues, but when I started to become more libertarian, I realized he was awful on foreign policy. But after the Las Vegas shooting, he said that this quote, and I'll read it. It says, "Good policy is good regardless of timing. Bad policy is bad regardless of timing. But when something horrific occurs, it's in the interest of those pushing a related policy to suggest that those who oppose the policy somehow don't care about victims. We heard this from gun control advocates after Sandy Hook, after Pulse, after Virginia Tech, after Columbine, after every mass shooting. Passion doesn't make policy good or more worthwhile, and injecting emotional accusations into the process never makes policy or the country better. Usually such accusations merely end with more heavy-handed government policy that doesn't actually achieve the end for which it supposedly aims. So yeah, just going along with the last podcast where you guys talked about Israel and Hamas, I think like there's this standard that he implements when he's talking about domestic policy, but when he's talking about foreign policy, I mean, he was one of the worst immediately after the invasion.
I mean, there's no better, I don't know how to describe him, but he was just like ghoulish on how much he was just like, no, they should go in and kill them all.
Yeah.
Kind of like, that was effectively his position in the beginnings of this. Maybe he's toned it down a bit. I don't know. I don't really listen to Ben Shapiro that much, but he is. It's very, very emotionally driven. So when Tucker is in that clip that you had posted there, Liam, saying like, whatever happened to this guy, the facts don't care about your feelings, guys. Like he is all feelings right now.
and Tucker's perspective, he's not even like pro-Palestine or pro-Hamas or anything. He's just saying like, slow down. Like we should have cool heads here and not jump into a policy that will destroy the United States. Like he's just advocating against U.S. intervention, specifically against intervention in Iran, which would be devastating for the entire region and the United States.
Mm-hmm. To close, do you think Tucker Carlson is a libertarian?
I don't know. I have heard that he's in contact with Dave Smith. I don't know if that's true. But if he is, that is amazing. We need that to happen. We need Dave Smith to connect with Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and all of these people who seem to be libertarian but don't identify as such.
Well, yeah, it's less. I would think of him like he was a libertarian actually back in the days in Crossfire. Like he used to wear a bow tie and he was called like a libertarian, all that kind of stuff. And then he kind of became more communitarian over time.
Yeah. And a lot of these things, they're kind of just words. Like we have to understand the landscape and where the battlefield is being drawn right now. And a lot of people try to have these annoying purity tests of like, is he a libertarian? Is he a perfect libertarian? Is he 80% libertarian? And it's like, I don't really think it matters in this at this point, right?
He's great on the most important issue of our time, which is Ukraine and this potential future war with Iran.
And it's not just that, he's been very good on a lot of the most important issues, right? It's not even just like the most important.
While he was at Fox News, you can also look this up on my profile. Just search Tucker Carlson on my profile. He did a segment on monetary policy where he basically criticizes, having artificial credit. It's incredible. I think he's almost there, but when he interviewed Javier Milei, he introduced him as saying, "Oh, well, he's not a libertarian in the American sense. He's a libertarian in the traditional sense." And I actually I think that's partially the Libertarian Party's fault. Actually, it's entirely the Libertarian Party's fault. They have completely destroyed the image, and thankfully, since I've been involved, they've taken it over. And I believe now we can actually say, like, when you identify as libertarian, you're also identifying with the values of the party itself, and I'm very happy about that.
That's such an important thing, because like I resist kind of calling myself a libertarian, despite like Murray Rothbard and Hayek and all these people. Like I completely agree with them on all of these economics, but there's a deep branding issue where the name often lumps me in with people that I really don't like.
Yep.
And so when Tucker Carlson does that, he's not like those wacky libertarians, and I think that's a very important thing to recognize, is that branding issue that does exist there.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that on the big issues, you're always in this place where you're trying to find the coalition, pull that together. That's like the political interest, and that's absolutely a fundamental that is really, really super important. The question is, and this is always the thing that's sitting in the background, is right now these are the big important issues. They soon might not be, right? And what are those other issues, and what does he draw on for his inspiration? So when you're asking the question, what is he? How would you define him? That's kind of where I think about it. Like, for example, Milei gets in trouble on saying we should sell organs.
Yep.
Now that would solve problems in the organ donating market, because it would reward people for selling them. Now, a lot of people have like a disgust like response to that. Communitarians especially do, right? They have like a sacredness to the body and to the internal parts of the body. And so by selling that, you're kind of violating that sacredness. That underlying instinct tells you something about the direction that he's going to be. If we get that libertarian president who says, hey, we have a huge problem with kidneys and we kind of open a market for kidneys like they do in Iran, but we can't do it here in America, that would solve the gap, and then more people would survive their kidney cancer and people would be rewarded for it. In that case, they're going to have the wrong instinct there, right? Much like Ben Shapiro had the wrong instinct on foreign policy.
Yeah, it's so on Tucker Carlson, like specifically, he because there are a lot of suggestions that he might actually run for president or vice president, and like I love him when it comes to foreign policy, but if he were to, he is really wrong on the drug war, and he has suggested that we should go to war with Mexico, bomb Mexico, because like if we are going to go to war with Ukraine, like that has no connection to the United States. There's no interest, but like there are people poisoning United States citizens in the United States because of these drugs, and therefore we should go to war with them. And like I think exactly to your point, like people, they aren't drawing from specific principles, because if you actually care about the drug war, like libertarianism is the answer. Like if you actually want a solution, you have to take out the cartels, and the way you take out the cartels is not by bombing them like Tucker Carlson wants. It's by legalizing them, because by prohibiting drugs, you are basically subsidizing the black market, and you're also encouraging the substances to be actually in smaller amounts and more dense, because in order to like traffic them across the border, you need to have them more dense and more discreet, and that's how you're ending up with all these overdoses, and people don't want to hear that. But if you want real solutions, you have to look at the economics of the drug war, and I think that's exactly the problem with Tucker Carlson.
It's just the problem at the time, and then what your values are in those problems. Yeah. But I totally agree, Kyle. We're at an interesting juncture right now.
Kyle,
I totally agree with Kyle.
Oh, I thought you said. Yeah. I thought you were talking to.
I agree with you. I mean, I'm trying to round the circle on what our point here, where he's saying like, hey, there's things that are important here, and it's not necessarily that he's not pure. And I agree. I totally understand that.
Well, because I get into arguments with libertarians all the time about this stuff, where they're just like, well, actually, and they get all kind of weird about certain things. It's like, none of that matters in the moment. Like none of it matters. You're just getting all weird and twisted because of like this random thing that does not matter for the current thing that is happening. This is like, you're too abstract almost.
And I know we said we were going to close, but before we do, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Libertarian Party.
We're having too good of a time. So we're just going to keep going.
We're never going to stop.
But I do want to shout out the Libertarian Party for this, because they are emphasizing coalition. Like they had an End the War rally in Washington, D.C. with leftists. And I think coalition building is extremely important, and something that the Libertarian Party has shied away from. And Angela McCardle, she released a video congratulating Javier Milei when he was elected. And she's making an effort to reach out to these libertarian parties in other countries. And she's launched an Operation Warhawk removal campaign, putting up billboards all around the U.S., basically saying Democrats are warhawks. They're warhawks when they're in office, but they're doves when they're running for office. And so I'm very happy with the direction of the Libertarian Party. And I think we can now say comfortably, and the Republicans might not like this, that the closest people to Javier Milei in the United States are libertarians. I think we can say that Javier Milei is a libertarian, and that libertarians like Dave Smith are the closest to him.
Well, and there's an added thing too, is like thinking about those coalitions with that anti-war rally that happened, is like using the good lefties, people like the Jimmy Dores of the world, who are aligned with us on a lot of issues, but not on every other issue. Like we understand we're not the same, but we can have alliances on some of the most important issues, like the war stuff, or people like Vivek Ramaswamy running. Like, he's very good on a lot of things, and libertarians will disagree with him on a few things. Yeah. Like we can recognize these things, and we don't have to be like super heavily critical on the things that we disagree with him on. In the moment, it's probably more beneficial to be in alignment with these types of people.
Well, and when we reach out, we actually change their minds. Like in the video of Jimmy Dore, where he's shouting out my podcast, you guys played it in a previous episode. He's talking about Keynesianism, and he's basically saying like Jimmy Dore is at a point where he's starting to recognize that Bitcoin is good, that central banking is bad, and that like Keynesianism is terrible. That is a very good thing, and I think that we can attribute that to the olive branch from the libertarians to people like Jimmy Dore.
Yeah, and we can recognize that, but also be like, okay, Jimmy Dore is a little wacky on Medicare for all, but we don't have to focus on that. Like, we just don't have to. It's not useful for the actual movement of these things.
Choosing to focus to ally with people who agree with you. It's that simple, right? Yeah. I'm not going to spit in the eye of my ally on this on some unrelated issue when we're working together on the issue we're working on.
When I was, you had talked about the Defend the Guard Act with Adam Thuen when he was on the podcast, and we had leftists working with us on that. Like, that is huge. But most of them were combat vets from War on Terror. And we had the ACLU in the room. So we had people like Chris Inget, who's like extremely conservative. We had people like Adam Thuen in the room. And then you had the ACLU in the room promoting the same bill. And the sponsor of the Senate side bill, he had never had a bill where the ACLU was endorsing it. It was the first time that they had allied on a bill. So I think that it's a testament to coalition building. I think that that's kind of the role of the Libertarian Party, is identifying those, because the reality is we don't have a lot of influence, but we can kind of organize and try to coalesce around these issues.
That's a good ending right there.
Really is. Well, Liam, in the spirit of the season, we're very thankful for you joining us this evening. Thankful for the work that you're doing in the pursuit of liberty. And killing it on Twitter. We're going to keep following you. Where can people find you around the internet?
Yeah, so I'm at MLIAM McCollum, MCCOLLUM on Twitter. Also look up the Liam McCollum Show on all the podcatchers and YouTube. I'm also co-hosting the Decentralized Revolution podcast, which is the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus podcast. And please look up defendtheguard.us. That is also a movement that I'm affiliated with. We're trying to have a statewide movement where we are basically saying that states will not deploy their National Guard troops. It will prohibit the governor from sending National Guard troops overseas if Congress has not declared war.
Beautiful. Definitely look those things up. We will put them in the show notes below the video. On behalf of David, the Bald Eagle of Liberty Rand, and Kyle Pudgy Penguin Mac, and Nate Bennett. My name is Joe Sheehan. I really appreciate you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot. Thanks for tuning in to Human Reaction. Help us fight internet censorship by liking, commenting, subscribing, following, and sharing the show with your friends. To find us around the internet, visit linktree.com/humanreactionpod.